Chapter 17 and 18. Chapter 17. Debunking. I never imagined I'd be in the position of debunking a vampire myth, but I couldn't just let Marie get away with the story. Pilson was right about that, at least. There were real people here, real victims. I was fairly certain that Marie wasn't using the story to pull off some kind of insanity plea, but just the same, if she was determined to stick to her blood drinker tale, she was going to have to earn it. So I started checking out books. A whole lot of books that I had to hide inside my coat like they were dirty. It was embarrassing to even ask our school librarian, but she didn't bat an eye. No pun intended. But I thought the elementary school rumors about her being a witch might actually be true. But if it hadn't been for her, I might have gotten nowhere. Only the investigators were privy to the blood-drinking detail of the confession by then, so I couldn't ask Mr. McBride, though I did later on, and he found me a pretty good book on Mercy Brown and the vampire hysteria of New England. The next time I interviewed Marie, I was armed with knowledge of vampiric tradition. We met at her cell. My dad didn't have any objections to our meeting there, though I was surprised that Mr. Pilson didn't. Looking back, it's impossible that my father never even asked him. Looking back, it's possible, not impossible. In any case, when I got there, I had to haul the cumbersome tape recorder up there with me. It was such an awkward shape that I nearly dropped it, and the only thing that saved me from spending the next several years paying my father back was that I arrived when Marie had a visitor. Nancy had come up from the reception desk. She and Marie had taken a shine to each other. I think Marie reminded her of the daughter she lost in the fire. As I burst through the two-color door, Nancy rose from her chair and said, "Michael, let me help you." She swooped down just in time to catch the tape recorder as it bobbled from my grip. Then she helped me carry it to the table and set it up. "I'll give you the room," she said. "If you are still at it when I come back from my dinner break, I'll bring you some cookies and sandwiches." "That thing sure seems heavy," Marie noted when we were alone. "Nancy must be stronger than she looks." You two seem pretty friendly," I said. Marie shrugged. Did you bring me those smokes?" "Shoot, I forgot again. I'm sorry." "Sure." "No, I am really. I keep meaning to swipe a pack from Percy." "Don't worry about it," she said, and then slipped a cigarette out of her sock. She smiled at me and lit it with a match struck against the cement wall. She was wearing the same blue jeans rolled to the ankle and a different white shirt. Her hair looked dark and glossy in its ponytail, the ends of the black ribbon nearly as long as the strands. Inside her cell, she seemed more at ease and in control of the space, and despite the fact that I had lived in this part of the jail for many years of my life, stepping into my old kitchen felt like Marie receiving me into her parlor. "Where'd you get that?" I asked and pointed to the cigarette. "Never mind." She exhaled. "You don't think you're the only boy I'm talking to?" "I do think that, actually. Are you keeping secrets, Marie?" "Everything's a secret until I tell you. But I'm going to tell you everything, so I guess, no, I'm not keeping secrets." She watched me a minute and then laughed. "Lighten up. I got it from Nancy. Jealous. "I'm not jealous," I said, except that I kind of was. Marie was my secret thing, an entire world separate from my usual one. It shocked me how quickly I'd begun to think of her as mine. She took another drag and gestured to the tape recorder so we could begin. "How have you been?" I asked on the record. She gestured to the walls to the tiny kitchen, the small writing desk in her cell. "Better here than some other places." But then she seemed to regret saying so. "I am sorry, that you've gotten caught up in this mess. Your mom and dad, too." "But are you sorry for the rest?" I asked. She shrugged. "What good does sorry do?" she said quietly. "They're all still dead." "Then why tell me what happened? To avoid the death penalty? To unburden your soul?" She laughed. "To stop your accomplice from hurting anyone else?" Marie cast a quick look towards her window. "He won't hurt anyone else. Not for a while, anyway. But when he decides to, nothing I say is going to stop him." "Because he's a blood drinker?" She nodded. "No one stopped him before," she said. No one? I asked. He's still alive, isn't he? Sort of. He isn't really what you say he is. Vampires aren't real. Believe what you need to believe, Michael. I'm just telling you what happened. I'm not saying you're a liar, Marie, just that maybe he fooled you. Sure, because I'm a stupid girl. She curled her lip. Do I seem stupid to you? Because I stopped going to school? I paused. No, she didn't. She seemed smart. Rough, maybe. Fast, maybe. But not stupid, or like the kind of person it would be easy to get one over on. Tell me about him, then, I said. How did he find you? Were you in a graveyard? Did you stumble across his coffin? You're making fun. Of course I am. When you tell me something ridiculous. Were all those empty bodies ridiculous? Where did all their blood go, Michael, if he didn't drink it? Maybe he moved them. Maybe the victims were killed someplace else. Except that one of the victims, Jeff Booker, found at a service station slumped over the cash register, had been seen alive by a previous customer not 30 minutes before he was found dead. How could he move around in the daylight? I asked. With a parasol, she said sarcastically. He doesn't burn up in the daylight, all right? And he can go into churches too. Not that we ever did. Are you done now? Are you? I asked. D.A. Pilson's not happy about what you're telling me. I've heard him talking about going to his governor, getting you extradited. I'm sure he will. I frowned. I didn't know it then, but Pilson had already tried, and failed. The killings had seemingly stopped, or at least paused, and in the meantime no one wanted to get in deeper with Marie. They knew what it would look like if they hauled a 15-year-old girl to the electric chair, lickety-split. Marie, if he is what you say, and he has killed before, then why haven't we seen any murders like this? You probably have. You just didn't recognize them. These kind of strange, grisly killings? I asked, dubious. I doubt that we've just let them go unsolved. Tell that to the Black Dahlia, she said, and snuffed out the nub of her cigarette. Or those people in the house by the train. The one where all the mirrors were covered and there was a bowl of blood and some bacon on the table. I said nothing. I'd heard of the Dahlia, but the other case was unknown to me. It certainly sounded strange enough, but I searched through the newspaper archives with our librarian for hours and was never able to identify it. But, I said carefully, there's never been another spree like this. Young people, teenagers. He didn't need to do it before. So why did he do it now? I don't know. She pulled her knees up to her chest, and I took a deep breath. It was hard not to scream at her. It was hard not to give my frustration away with a clenched fist or a cracked knuckle, to appear neutral when I was sure she was making it all up as she went. You don't have forever, you know, I said. You only have until they catch him. Then they won't care what your side of the story is. She laughed a little and muttered, Forever. Then she stretched her arms. You're right, though, Michael, about not having all the time. You're just wrong about how much. I have until they realize they won't catch him. Until they give up. That's when they'll come for me. How long do you think that'll be? I asked. As long as he keeps them jumping, she said and shrugged. You're the cop's son. You would know better than I would. I didn't know anything better than she would. None of us did. Black Deer Falls, Pilson, the deputies, and my dad, we were all stumbling around in the dark. You said he didn't need to do it, I said quietly. What do you mean? She watched me, trying to see if I was serious. Then she turned her wrist over and showed me her scars. He doesn't always kill, she said. Sometimes he just feeds. I leaned forward to look at the tiny lines that ran from the palm of her hand up to the elbow to disappear into her shirt. There were so many that the skin was like a patchwork, crisscrossing, some running along the length of her arm and others cutting across it. So many, but so delicate and pink that you could miss them if you weren't really looking. You can come closer if you want. I got up, and she held her arm up to the bars. I reached through and took it. Her skin was cool and smooth until I ran my thumb over the small raised scars. Some of them seemed tentative. They were thinner, shallower, but they gained in confidence. The largest one, tucked into the fold of her wrist, looked like it should have had stitches. "There were others, too," she said. "Where?" I asked, but she didn't need answer, and I remember where the other victims had been cut, at their throats or the inner thigh. Marie's throat was untouched, and the blood rushed to my cheeks. "You have good hands," she said, and I realized I was still holding her. "Gentle. You're not the kind of boy he'd want me hanging around." "What is that?" I asked. "The good kind. Good-looking, good-hearted. Just good." "I thought you said the blood drinker was handsome." She laughed. No, he was. He could have been a film star." "Who did this to your arm, Marie?" I asked, and she jerked free. "I told you. He did." I withdrew and wiped my clammy hands on my jeans. "It must have hurt." She shrugged. "It didn't hurt so much." "Where is he now?" I cleared my throat and returned to my chair. "Is he still here? Could he hide in Black Deer Falls? As a bat?" She didn't like me teasing her, and I don't know why I kept it up. "Maybe he could, and maybe he couldn't," she snapped. "Your joking about it won't change what happened." I was getting nowhere. I considered changing tactics, confronting her, making her mad. Except Pilson had already tried that and failed, and I couldn't imagine that I could do much better. "Someone left a snake in my friend Percy's car," I said simply, surprised the moment the words came out. The snake and the blood drinker had not been connected in my mind until right then. "What do you mean someone left a snake?" she asked. "We got into his car and there was a snake on the seat between us. It was only a python, I guess, and it was in a burlap sack. But Percy nearly hit a truck." "Your friend Percy, does he have many enemies?" "No," I said. Everybody likes Percy, even when he's annoying." I smiled a little. "It was just a joke." "Was it?" she asked like she thought it wasn't. "Marie, do you know where he is?" "No, but I always thought he might stick around to watch." She looked at me seriously. "You shouldn't go off on your own, Michael." I almost smiled. I wasn't going to hide from a make-believe monster, but someone real had killed Steve Carlson. "You think he'd come after me, or my family?" I asked, but she didn't answer. I suppose she couldn't have known. "Marie, why did he leave you that night after the murders?" She clenched her teeth. "Because the bastard wanted me to get caught." Chapter 18. The Blood Drinker. In the third week of October, the upper Midwest got hit with an early snowstorm. The farmers hated it. They had to start hay-feeding their cows sooner than planned. And Percy was worried about his buck, the one he'd been tracking all summer. So one afternoon we headed into the woods behind the Valentine house to follow a few deer trails and do a feeding run, to make sure Percy's buck didn't wander off to get shot by someone else. "He's too pretty to wind up on Martin Greenway's stupid den wall," he said. "But just pretty enough for yours?" I asked. "We both know you're not going to shoot it." "Well, next year he'll be even bigger." And bigger, I said, until he turns gray and hunched over with arthritis. I followed Percy through the silent trees, our boots sinking into soft snow that was still good, not hard and crusted from melting and refreezing. He showed me the trails the deer were moving through, and the last places he'd seen the buck, in the thicket near the swamp. I watched him shimmy up trees to cut branches down, nice twiggy branches full of buds and stuck-on acorns for the deer to find and feed on. "Gotta keep plenty of feet out," he said as he dropped down another branch, then bent another to feeding height so I could tie it down with baling twine. I jumped up and grabbed a branch, pulling the tender bits closer to the ground. "You know, there's still plenty of leaves on the shrubs that he can paw up," I said. But Percy just grinned, trying to fatten him up until he's too wide to run. "You're just spoiling him." I was a little worried about Percy, to be honest. Bow season was already on, and if that buck wandered out of the Valentine swamp and onto someone else's property after a doe or something, it would have broken Percy's heart. "Percy, do you still think about the murders? I'd Ahead of me, he broke the branch he'd been hanging onto. I try not to, he said. But you do. Sure. Do you ever wonder what happened to the blood? Well, yeah, everyone wonders about that. He turned to me. Why? Do you know? No, I said, but it's so strange. Why take it? What did he want it for? What do you mean take it? He was taking it? I thought it was just... He gestured to the air. Somewhere else. I took a deep breath. What if he wanted to drink it? I expected Percy to laugh or to shove me and tell me to grow up, but he just shrugged. Sure, he said, like the papers call it, the Dracula murders. He turned back to the deer trail in the trees. You don't think that's odd? Yeah, I think it's odd. I think it's a pile of nonsense. We went on along the trail, pulling down branches and shaking snow off the taller bushes. For being such a loudmouth, Percy didn't like to talk much on those runs. He didn't want to spook the deer. But I had too much on my mind. Did you know that in Europe they believed that vampirism could cause the plague? They buried women with stones in their mouths to keep them from feeding on corpses in the mass graves, and they'd bury them face down so they'd lose their way in the dirt if they tried to dig out. Percy frowned at me. He slapped his hands together to get the cold bits of bark off and washed his palms with snow. What are you on about? I told him what I had been reading, disturbing tales about babies being born with full sets of teeth, and about Mercy Brown, whose father let her be dug up so his neighbors could cut out her heart and burn it. When I got to the part about her brother eating the ashes, Percy swore loudly. Why in the jumped-up hell are you reading about stuff like that? He asked. I just keep thinking about the blood, how it was all missing. And I don't know. I got to wondering if someone could be so deluded, to try and kill that way, to drink it. I hesitated. Can you even imagine something like that? No, I can't imagine, he said, and I'd rather not imagine. The Dracula murders was just a name the papers made up. How much blood do you think is in a man? Or in those two girls, those nurses? You couldn't drink that much, no way. He was looking at me like I'd completely lost it. Yeah, I said as I heard the echo of Marie's words through the trees. Where did the blood go? A whisper, the barest brush of her lips against my ear. You're right, I was just thinking. This thing's really got you turned around, he said. Are you sure you should? I mean, if you want to quit, your dad would understand. So would everyone else. And if they didn't, well, I can't stop, Percy. He nodded. Yeah, I know you can't. Biggest story of the century, right? When it's over, there'll be colleges, scholarships. You'll go on to Cronkite, and I'll go over to your folks' house and watch it with them. He grinned. He was proud of me, excited for me, even though papers and scholarships weren't what I'd meant. Maybe you can come along, I said. Yeah, maybe I'll come to college too. Not that I would get in, but just come along to get a place. Yeah. Nothing here that won't be here anyway when we get back. He looked up into the branches. Not like the birdseed factory is going to close down. Yeah, I said softly, and he went on ahead down the trail. When I looked up again, Percy was gone, soaked up by the trees. I must have moved slower than I thought, but it was okay. It's nearly impossible to get lost in the woods behind Percy in most places, especially since I'd been trapezing through them since I was 9. And there were Percy's tracks in the snow, headed up the deer trail. Perce, I called out and waited. Percy? He might have been too far off to hear. When he pushed his feeding run, he'd double back and find me. It was disconcerting to look up and realize he was no longer 4 feet in front of me, but it wasn't dangerous, or even that strange, considering how fast Percy moved when he stripped branches. At least that's what I told myself when I stood alone in the middle of the quiet forest. I opened my mouth to shout again, but all of a sudden I didn't want to make any noise. A strange sensation had begun to creep up my back, like I was being watched through the trees. I stiffened, and my boots squeaked loudly in the snow. I held my breath and looked for birds or squirrels, but there weren't any. I thought of a story my dad had told me when he was younger and answered a burglary call. The feeling he'd had when he walked through an open door and had known that the house wasn't empty. Damn it, Marie, I muttered into my collar, because it was her fault. She had filled my head with stories of murderers and a blood-drinking movie monster. An hour earlier, I would have laughed out loud, but in those trees I felt what a deer must feel when a hunter is on them. I was waiting for the ambush and hoping I'd be fast enough to get away. When Percy's dark shape stepped onto the path again, I must have jumped a mile. The inside of my coat collar was thick with sweat. "Percy," I said, "I lost you for a minute." "Yeah," he replied. "I cut in towards the swamp and then back out again." He looked at my face. "What's with you? You catching sick or something?" "Maybe. This coat's no good." The coat was fine. If anything, it felt a little too warm. I wanted to shrug out of it. I was shaking all over. Percy cocked his head like he might laugh. Then he stopped short. "What?" I asked. "What's that?" "What's what?" I demanded loudly. He pointed over my shoulder, and I couldn't bring myself to turn around to look. He walked back and moved past me to a tree not far off the deer path. There was a symbol marked onto it, like a sun or a flower beneath a long upside-down T. It was above head level when Percy took off his glove to run fingers in the carved grooves he had to reach. "Is that a tear or a cross?" he asked. "I don't know." "It's deep." He rubbed his fingers together and sniffed them. "Sap. Feels fresh. But who in the hell would come out here and mark up one of our trees?" Everyone knew the land belonged to the Valentines. And everyone knew that if you poached a deer on Valentine property, you were primed to catch a bullet in the leg, or so Mo liked to loudly proclaim. "Are there tracks?" Percy looked down and around the base of the trunk. "Oh yeah," he bent down. "And they're not old either." He looked over his shoulder, quiet. Then he looked back to me. "Did you see anyone?" I shook my head. Percy stood back up, shoved his hand into his glove, and came back to where I stood. The strangeness was getting to him, too. "We should have seen that on the way in," he said. "Unless they did it after we'd gone past." He chewed the inner part of his lip. "Pop's going to be pissed if someone's been out here." "Marie said she thinks he might still be here, in Black Deer Falls." Percy looked at me. We were teetering on the edge, the fear flying around us like bugs. If we let it land, we would run for his house as fast as our legs would carry us, like we used to when we were kids, running from an imagined cougar. Or we could do something else. We'd been afraid too many times lately. In the Carlson house, by the stream with Petunia and Lulabelle. Let's find the bastard. We set off. When I was alone, the killer had become something more than flesh and blood. But with Percy back, my fear changed again to anger. He was just one man, and we outnumbered him. I was tall and an athlete. Percy was a little shorter, but wiry and armed with a hunting knife. Percy took the lead. He was by far the better tracker, though not even I would have had a problem following the prints as they wove around trunks just to one side of the deer trail. They were large and deep. Sometimes near a tree they would become a flurry of kicked and trampled snow, and we would find another symbol carved into the bark. We'd nearly reached the edge of Percy's backyard when the tracks doubled back on themselves and disappeared. "Oh, hell, we've been going the wrong way." "No, we haven't." Percy kept on looking around, but I knew he was wrong. There hadn't been any other tracks leading from the first carving we'd found, and we had followed every offshoot. "Well, they didn't just up and disappear." He ducked and turned to peer into the trees from all directions. His voice became a hissing whisper. "It can't really be him, can it?" Him. The man who killed the Carlsons. That feeling was back again, that we were being watched. Back and stronger than ever. "We've got to get out of here," Percy said, "and tell your dad." "Tell him what? That a vampire is following us on a deer-feeding run, carving symbols into tree trunks and vanishing without a trace?" "Well, not the vampire bit, but otherwise, yeah." We hurried down the deer trail until Percy's house was visible. The sight of us made us feel safe, even though it was a lie. There was no one home at Percy's house that day, and no other house around for miles. "I don't want to tell my dad." "But you need to, don't you?" Percy asked. "If there's any chance it could be him." I did tell my dad, and he had men search the woods until dusk. Bert and Charlie called in on his off day. My dad stopped short of getting extra help from the state police, but he did let Mo lead some of his pals into the woods. Richard Whittingren and Skinny Earl Anderson. Guys who knew the forest as well as we did. They found nothing. No old fires, no campsites, and they too lost the trail at the last carved symbol. Mo thought whoever it was must have covered up from there. They took photos of the carvings, and my dad told me it was good that I'd let him know. But I heard it in his voice. He'd have to take every last man out for beers as a way of apologizing for wasting a day on his spooked kid. I rode home with my dad after the search ended, fingers aching from the cold, dreading when the feeling would return to my feet. When I followed him silently up the porch, I scooped up Don's old cat on the way. He was good and didn't scratch me, despite my never having picked him up before. He even purred against my chest. "Dawn!" I shouted. "Yeah," she came bounding down the stairs. "What are you doing to my cat?" "I'm not doing anything to him." I set him down, and he stuck his gray tail out indignantly. "Don't just throw him down." "I didn't just throw him down," I said as she picked him up. "Just keep him inside for a while," I said. "Percy heard some howling in the woods. He thinks some wolves might have come down with the snow."